Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. Today with us is Mathew Passy. He is founder and former owner of the podcast consultant and suit recording. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast, you can go to podbuyer.com. That is the sponsor of this pod. Podcasts are fun, podcasts are scale, podcasts are learning and networking. That's why I have Mathew today with me. And it happens we're going to discuss podcasting. So podpire.com for that. Mathew, can you tell us a bit more about yourself and tell us about what you're into nowadays?
Sure. So I've been in the podcasting space for about 15 years, got started working in radio here in New Jersey, launched my first podcast, part of the newsroom at a local talk station, right around the time that the iPhone and the first podcast store came out. Then worked at the Wall Street Journal for 8 years, doing a mix of radio and podcasting with them. At the end of 2014, they decided to get out of the radio business, laid off the entire radio and podcasting unit. So found myself without a job. And while I was trying to figure out my next move, people that I used to interview regularly were approaching me asking if I could help them with podcasts because they'd been doing it with us regularly and they were seeing some benefits to them. I said, yeah, sure. We could figure that out. Why not? I really just need a computer. And so I started to produce podcasts for some individual clients, and lo and behold, the timing was excellent and the work just kept growing and growing and growing. And so around 2016, did a big rebrand to the podcast consultant. And I was running that business and agency up until earlier this year when somebody acquired us and they're going to take the podcast consultant to the next level. During that time, we also built and launched a podcast studio here in South Jersey, video, audio recording. Studio is still going strong, but as part of my sale and non-compete, I had to step away from that as well. And right now I'm taking some, well-deserved time off to kind of think about what I really want to focus on in the future, but still have my hand in a few side projects. Going to launch a website about podcasting technology and maybe offer some new and interesting services in that world as we can develop them.
Did you know that I had Carl on the pod?
I did. In fact, I told him I was doing this and he mentioned that he had just done the show as well. So I figured it was a very symbiotic to have both of us on here.
Controlled serendipity. Yeah, I think I reached out via LinkedIn or straight up by email. So how did that acquisition feel? Was that in the plans for you? Did you get some kind of financial relief there? Because it's always hard to run a business. Tell me how you felt once you received that check.
I'll be honest, when I was first approached about somebody wanting to acquire the business, I thought I was definitely getting scammed or this couldn't be true. Why would somebody want to buy my business? But sure enough, after I got to meet Carl, who is one of the new co-owners, and really got to talk to him and his partner Manny about why they were looking, what they were hoping to accomplish, right? What were their goals and dreams for podcast business that they were acquiring? And then, they'd done their due diligence on a bunch of places and they came back. I jumped at the opportunity, and maybe jump's not the right word because it did take a lot of deliberation, a lot of thinking, a lot of, consulting with family and professionals about this. And the truth was I never had an exit strategy, because I started this business on a whim as a part-time side hustle while I was trying to find another job. It kind of grew a little bit out of my control, and it had gotten to a place where I was doing so much work for it that I really didn't even have the time to kind of stop and take a step back and reconfigure some things and tweak some things and make it work in a way that would have been better for me in the long term. I was just I was keeping up with the daily grind of it and, getting through all the assignments, and the team was growing, but, I was just kind of in this place where I couldn't get out of my own way to bring this to where I think it could have been, to where it could have been self-sustaining and all these different things. So when this opportunity came along, I really saw it as a really nice exit strategy because I never had one. And truthfully, it was really within a short amount of time, a few weeks, maybe a month or so, that while I was still helping to run the business, Carl and Manny were really in the background doing all these upgrades and improvements and processes and changes. And, I could see now the things that I should have been doing and where they are going to take this and what they're going to do with it. So part of me felt a lot of relief because I was able to, you know, I can breathe a little bit. I was putting in, 60, 80-hour weeks working on this. And I could not feel the pressure of thinking, oh no, if I stop working on this and I disappoint a few clients, like we're not going to be able to make our mortgage payments this month or things like that. So it was a bit of a relief when the sale finally went through and I could continue to help, right? Continue to help our clients, continue to help our team, continue to help Carl and Manny grow this and see where it could go, but not feel so intertwined in it that, right, its failure was our failure and things like that. So relief is probably the best word. It's also just been an incredible lesson and has me kind of invigorated and thinking about how I'll do whatever I do next differently and, really calculate things a little bit better. So listen, if somebody else wants to buy that, great, but I won't feel like I have to. Like I'll feel a little bit better about, I can hold on to this for as long as I want instead.
And you think that business scales for your acquirers isn't like consulting the least scalable business model out there?
Do I think it's a scalable model? I think it's very, very scalable. And the real problem was that I was scaling it piecemeal, right? Like I was still way too involved and intertwined in the day to day where I couldn't step back and put into place the new processes that it needed to scale. We had laid really good groundwork, really good foundation, and it probably wasn't even a technical thing. It was probably more of an emotional thing, right? It was that, and I'm sure, with all the founders and the leaders and the business, startup folks who you've spoken to, probably a lot of them had this problem of being able to relinquish control and, trust that things will be okay if they don't have their hands on the wheel 24/7. So, once I was able to, see what could be done, right? Like what were the possibilities? I mean, everything they did, like as soon as they did it, they'd be like, oh, I wanted to do that 3 months ago. Oh, I wish I'd done that 2 years ago. It was like all these things that just made so much sense, but I was struggling to pull back from the day to day and say, okay, I trust my team. They could focus on this now. Let me go work on these few things and understand that things might have to break a little bit before they get better. But it was hard because, our livelihood and our family and, everything else was so tied to it that it was a hard thing to give up on.
Podcasting as a business, how have you seen it evolve in the 15 years time span? Because I think of John Lee Dumas back in these days, no G. I think a bunch of entrepreneurs started podcasting because of this guy, and podcasting was very obscure. Actually, I think it was like MP3s, right? People played MP3s on their cell phones. So tell us about the evolution of pod and where you see it moving forward in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, when I started working on it, it was really because it had evolved from that, like you need to know how to move an MP3 file off your computer and put it onto your mobile device or, MP3 player or whatever. It was really when Apple introduced that podcast store and it was easier for someone with an Apple device to consume this content. And then, a few other players started to come around. It was still fairly niche though, through what I will call my, media days, working for radio, working for Wall Street Journal and whatnot. And it was right around the time that we got laid off, actually, that podcasting had this like big pop culture renaissance moment when the podcast Serial came out. And all of a sudden, mainstream was talking about podcasting, right? They were being spoofed on SNL and, news stories were popping up about this podcast. And, Adnan Syed was all over the news because of it. And so it was right around then when I started doing this. And yeah, to your point, there were a lot of entrepreneurial podcasts. There were a lot of folks who were doing podcasts basically to tell people, hey, podcasting is a way to make money. But it seemed like most of the people who were using it were making money by selling people systems to make money. And it slowly, but also quickly exploded from there. You started to see the emergence of more professionalized podcasting content, right? You had a lot more news podcasts popping up, a lot more large media institutions using this as a suitable distribution method. You started to see the emergence of more fiction and highly produced entertainment podcasts coming along, right? Not just the comedians who were doing podcasts like the Mark Marons of the world or the Joe Rogans of the world, but right, you really start to see folks writing unique stories, turning them into podcasts, taking nonfiction stories and putting that out as podcasts. And then what we were seeing on our side was a lot of businesses understanding how to use this medium for themselves. And yeah, plenty of folks who use a podcast just to say like, hey, this is what I do, and I have a podcast. So now if you like what I say, use our services. But I was honestly seeing it more so as a networking tool. So clients who honestly didn't care if anybody listened, but the guests who they talked to were really the target of what it was that they were trying to do on the podcast. More folks who were using it as a resource for existing clients or existing folks, right? We had a lot of financial advisors who, something would happen in the markets, and instead of having to field 100 calls and explain the same thing to each client about what's happening in the market, they could record a single episode of the podcast, shoot that out an email, and now everybody was kind of able to hear the person's voice and be assured that they knew what they were doing, what they knew they were going on. So it was interesting to see this become a resource in some cases, a tool in others, a larger form of entertainment, right? As that was happening, you saw Spotify jumping in, investing a lot of money. You saw, all these other media companies jumping in and realizing not only is there potential in technology, but there is a lot of potential in just the way the content platform itself, the long form nature of it, the on-demand ability of it, the free form of it. And so it's just been great to see how many different ways people are able to use this technology to share content of all shapes and sizes and spectrums and costs and whatnot.
Let's talk about tech and systems. I see that you're related to Riverside, which is a pretty cool tool. What tech do you use nowadays, and what will be the role of AI into propelling new podcasts incredibly quick in the stratosphere?
So some of the most important tech that I use is obviously your podcast host, right? Those are the companies that allow you to manage your content, upload episodes, create your RSS feed. In that space, we typically refer our clients to Megaphone or Libsyn, or my personal favorite is a platform called Captivate. They put out incredible tools that basically allow an independent podcaster to operate on the same scale as these huge, larger scale networks and operations. So I'm a huge fan of their platform. You mentioned Riverside. Riverside is a great communications platform for recording audio and video content. And in fact, I credit Riverside with being one of the reasons why our business kind of, went to the next level early in the pandemic. We had just started to think about video production as well as audio production, and Riverside's ability to record those separate video tracks. They were one of the first ones to put out that technology. Really gave us some confidence to create that offering so that we could do better video editing and better video production on remote recordings versus say Zoom or Skype or something like that. So still a big fan of Riverside and what they're doing. Also Squadcast is another one that does something similar that we like. When it comes to AI, I mean, AI is already a big part of the space today. For example, we're using a tool called Cast Magic. I've seen another one called Capshow. All these tools that basically are able to listen, in quotes, to your content, and then the AI goes through and kind of generates a first draft of titles and show notes and social posts and all these different things. And while I don't think you can purely rely on the AI to produce your final version of that stuff, I know for a lot of folks, it's a lot easier to copy edit, some pre-written text than it is to stare at a blank piece of paper and have to write it for themselves. So that's pretty interesting. There's also another tool in the AI space. It just came out very, very recently, and I was testing it out. It's this thing called Podstash. And this guy built this plugin that basically allows you to kind of bookmark articles and web pages, and the AI is able to turn that into a podcast episode into your own little feed. So if there's an article that you're like, oh, this is great, I don't have time to read this, I'm about to get in my car, you kind of click a button, and then about 15-20 minutes later, it's all of a sudden popped up on your own personalized RSS feed, and now you can listen to that article instead of having to read it. So we're definitely going to see more AI tools. The one thing I don't want to see is too much AI replacing talent, right? I don't love the idea of people using AI to be the talent on their podcast, or to maybe make editorial decisions about their podcast. Like, I think you still need humans and creativity and instinct and passion and heart. But certainly those tools can maximize your workflow and, allow you to do more with less.
Right. And I mean, it's just not there yet to have like full agent permission to publish content at scale. That might be very disastrous. I thought also he was about to say that content out there might suffer because of AI if it does like 7 on 10 content at scale. For example, I'm checking your tool that you just recommended me. I checked Podstash before. Good name, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And if it turns Wikipedia articles into pods, sure, might be cool. The idea I'd have with that is an audio visual form of Wikipedia article. I think that would be cool, but I'm gonna try it. The point is, think like SEO people, they've really lowered the bar down when it comes to quality of information. Google was referring them in the last couple of decades, and now AI might do that even more at scale. So that we need to be careful as a humanity, because quality information will be really tough to come by, and it's already super tough, even without AI. I can tell you that many times I've listened to content out there and the advice given was so bad, it was like so not applicable. It's like $100 million entrepreneur giving advice to $500K a year entrepreneur. Context needs to be given, disclaimers, quote unquote, so that information can enter brains in a better way. I want to ask you, that we talked about the tech stack, right? That part is said. Thank you for mentioning all these tools. What about getting the guests on the pod? How do you filter a guest properly? And once they're on, how do you ask them great questions?
Well, so I think, how do you filter a guest properly is easy if you are someone who is doing this for the right reasons. So, there are plenty of folks out there who are basically like, I have a podcast, therefore I need to have guests. And so they just kind of throw and cast a very wide net, and they, whoever fills out their form, or whoever, comes across their stuff, that person gets invited on, they become a guest on the podcast, and whatever, it's a done deal. Most of the people who we worked with, their podcast was more about true curiosity. And so like, as someone who used to work in the media, I used to get pitches all day from PR people, communications folks, all sorts of places. Hey, have this person on your show. Hey, this person just wrote a book, have them on the show. And like, to this day, because my email is attached to a lot of RSS feeds of our clients, like, I get emails every day of people pitching guests to be on podcasts. And I have to tell them, like, we're not looking for pitches. Like, we're not desperate for guests. We pick the people who we want to talk to. And so I think if if that's the way you're doing it, it's very easy, because you simply are following your curiosity. Maybe you read an interesting article, heard a person on the podcast, heard about them through something else. In a lot of the cases, we'll have somebody on a show, and then at the end of that conversation, be like, this is a great chat. Anybody else in the space who you think we should be talking to? And if you've engaged with this person in an interesting way and you've given them a great platform to share their thoughts, they're happy to say like, oh yeah, you should definitely meet so-and-so and so-and-so, in which case your podcast then becomes this amazing networking tool as well as a discovery tool. That said, once you do figure out who the guests you are going to be. Oh, and by the way, if a guest says no, that's fine. I don't really need to hound them. I don't really need to push them. Like if somebody doesn't want to do a podcast, the worst thing you could do is make them do a podcast, because then it's probably going to provide like terrible content or be a really bad episode. The other thing is, if somebody says yes to your podcast and the interview or the episode isn't good, it's okay to not air that. Sometimes people feel obligated to put something out there, and you just have to remember, like, it's your show, it's your audience, it's the value that you're creating. If that person didn't add anything, listen, maybe you want to give them a second chance. Like, I know this person could do better. They were just nervous. Like, let's try again. But if after, talking to the person, you realize, oh, they're not really here to help, they're just here to plug something constantly. Yeah, it's okay to say, yeah, we're just not going to run that. Didn't work. It's a shame when it happens, but you have to value your audience and their time. How do you ask good questions? Truthfully, the best interviewers that we see are the best listeners. And so we always train our clients, like, have a set of questions handy, right? Have like 6 to 12 questions or talking points or whatever, things that you want to interact with this person about. But honestly, after you ask your first question, just sit back and listen, because that person, there are plenty of folks who ask, like, here are my 5 questions. Everybody gets asked the same 5 questions. And regardless of the answer, they just go from question 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. And it's like, these people are leading you in a direction and you're just moving on to the next thing. But people who really listen to their guests, they tend to hear little tidbits, or they're curious. And curiosity works because you have to remember, your audience did not prep to go into the episode. Your audience hasn't done the research. They are going into everything cold. And so if you are being curious and you are, following up on things that sound interesting, you're helping your audience, because they can, they're probably feeling the same way, like, oh, I want to hear more. And you ask for more. It's like, well, thank you, host, for, if you come at it like with too much prep and you're too, what they say, like inside baseball, or, you're speaking as if everybody knows what's in your head or everybody knows what's on your prep sheet, it's going to be hard for people to follow. So good podcasters are really good listeners. They're really curious. And then, yeah, I've seen guys literally, they ask their first question, they never come back to their talking points, but it gives a lot of people confidence to say, like, okay, we went down this route. Where do I want to go next? Instead of having dead air, they can just look at their paper and be like, oh, that's right, I wanted to ask you about this. So a little bit of research, a little bit of preparation, and then just a lot of patience and curiosity.
That's good. Thing that when you launch a pod, I'd go with like quantity at first and 1% quality daily. So 1% daily, you're more selective when it comes to your guests, and that's for your brain to pick up, how to ask good questions and so forth. And yes, prepare the questions. That could be a good helper, especially if you're nervous. Nervousness is probably the top 5 factor that could make an interview go wrong. If you are making the guest nervous, that is probably the worst thing that can happen. So yeah, have questions handy, or remember that if you ever stall, you can ask the guest about his favorite color.
Well, and we all of our clients and most of the shows that I've ever worked on, we're pre-taping. We're not doing them live. And so there's also no problem with just stopping, thinking, breathing, taking a pause, checking in with the guest and saying, hey, is everything going okay? Is there someplace that you want to go? Because ideally you have somebody who's going to listen to it afterwards, whether it's yourself or editor or whatever, somebody who can go in there and be like, okay, at 23 minutes, I've got to just take that out. So it goes right from their last answer to my next question. If you're doing it live, yeah, a little bit more preparation, a little bit more questions ahead of you. And yeah, maybe have like a stack of like fun, personality questions that might help to break up the monotony a little bit, or, loosen somebody up. I totally agree with that.
I was somewhat joking here, but yeah, curiosity, that is like the main insight here. I see a lot of podcasters starting their question with "I'm curious," you know. So these are like prompts for your own brain. So you cannot really stall when you prompt your brain correctly. You always start from a source of curiosity, of going deeper and trying to connect neurons in your brain. That's why I love podcasting. We're on time already, Matt. So like we could do a second edition later in 2024 because you're full of wisdom. Thank you for coming today. Where can people find out more about you?
Right now, the best place is just to find my name, Mathew Passy, on all the social media places. If you're still looking for great podcast production consulting, thepodcastconsultant.com. And keep your eyes out for podcastingtech.com, where we'll have some of those great resources we were talking about and more, to help podcasters figure out what's best for them.
And I am Charles Cormier, your host. That was Mathew Passy for the founderwisdompodcast.com.